Well, I don't want to shock you, but changing gears. On August 1st, 1966, this man, Charles Whitman, having himself just ended the lives of his beloved mother and his wife, climbed the clock tower at the University of Texas, and with his rifles began shooting those below. Widely described as the first mass shooting in the United States. It was after 17 lives had been taken that his life was ended. The interesting thing, I suppose, about this case is that before doing so, and even in the process of doing these things, Charles Whitman took notes, journaled about the feelings that were welling up inside of him that he could not control. He wrote with regret about not being able to stop himself. He had actually gone to a psychiatrist in the days ahead, still to no avail. And so after it happened, people wondered because, again, he had been abused physically by his father, but he had never failed to be successful. He was a Marine. He was a marksman. He was the youngest Eagle Scout in his region. And he was an engineering student at the University of Texas. All the while writing with regret about what was happening inside of him. And so Governor Connolly, the governor of Texas at the time, again, remember this was just 3 years after Kennedy's assassination, and so folks were just on edge. Governor Connolly ordered an investigation as to how this happened, to sort through the volumes of information that they had. And a young psychiatrist, Dr. Stuart Brown, shown here, he was a young psychiatrist and was on that panel. He was on that commission. The results of that commission were inconclusive. No one can figure out why Whitman did it. The autopsy found that he had a very small and slight cancerous growth near his amygdala in his brain, but they didn't say that was enough of a reason that it would have had that big of an impact on him. But what Dr. Brown saw in having interviewed the people around him, including his living father, and again, remember, he was abused by his father. He actually Whitman went and rescued his mother from the abuse of his father, loved his mother. So loved his wife. So there were so many confusing things. But what Dr. Brown found in all these interviews was that Whitman had experienced play deprivation, or an almost complete suppression of normal play behavior. His overbearing father never allowed him to play. And it is from play that Brown believes that we learn tolerance, social bonds, and empathy with others. Free play is necessary. Brown goes as far as to say that even rough and tumble play is absolutely a necessary part of our development. So Brown saw that this play had not happened in the lives of Whitman. And so what he did was he went from that commission and he went to study the most violent of offenders in the Texas State Penitentiary system. For 20 months, he interviewed the most violent of perpetrators. And he also interviewed regular nonviolent folks who were not incarcerated. And what he saw over and over and over again is that play was suppressed in the most violent. And so he came to this understanding and conclusion that play is absolutely necessary. It's a very long way to say what we kind of already know, but it was studied and found that play is absolutely necessary for children to be able to develop both physically and emotionally, and I would argue even spiritually. So moved by all of his work that years ago, he was the founding member of the National Institute for Play. And that organization not only studies play and its effect on children and adults, but it also culls. It takes the academic research from a variety of sources and puts it all together in one repository so one can study the effects of play. For example, in 2021, on the backside of the pandemic, 26 studies from 18 different nations were all interpreted by the National Institute of Play. And it showed that kids, especially during the pandemic, were not able to play in the ways that they should. Questioning then the impact that will have on that generation of children. And because the study was international, because all these studies, many of them happened in other places, it was studied and sought to understand how play impacted the poorest of children, because in many places, in many countries, children are put to work at such a young age that they have very little ability to play. But what the research found was that no matter where you are, no matter where you're raised, no matter what level of income you have, even the poorest of the poor, you learn more and develop socially better if you are allowed to free play. My friends, we are hardwired to play. God created us for play. And if we don't, we interrupt that. We fail to learn, we fail to grow, and we fail to be who God created us to be. So Paul has been, to this point in this series, our primary teacher, and so we've been going to understand Paul's words. And I invite and encourage you to open up to what Julie read for us on 1069. It is Ephesians chapter 5, and this text is quite an interesting one. Now, what we have to understand, especially about Ephesians, is that Paul wrote quite generally, giving us this overview of God's word and God's message, but then he also, with that, gives us instructions on how to live. Now, I just want to be clear, because there's some stuff before and after this. Not all of his instructions aged well. They were great for that time and space, but they weren't great for us now. So just be cautious if you read to the other side of this lesson. But he's giving instructions as to how to live. And we hear in verse 15 then, "Be careful then of how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of time, because these days are evil." This is a very, very interesting and complex sentence. A lot going on there, right? So be careful how you live. Again, great advice. Be with the wise people. Do the things that connect you to the wise people, not the unwise ones. And then to hear, especially an apostle, talk about the days being evil, that's a little counterintuitive to us. We're kind of like, really? But again, if we look and we look at our experience of how we see the world, we kind of oftentimes scratch our head and say, man, there's a lot of evil in the world. So Paul's not wrong when he says this. But the interesting thing is he talks about redeeming time. That's a very interesting phrase. The Greek is exorazo, which means to redeem time. Which again, that has an odd thought to it as well. But the point that Paul is making is we have to steward our time. We kind of take it back. We ransom it, if you will. We make the most of it. And I think we can really relate to that. I'm imagining that there are very few people in this room who haven't just sat down with their device and next thing you know, 20 minutes has gone by and you've done nothing, right? We fall into patterns of behavior. We don't always properly steward our time, and we're not always the best for it. And so Paul is making it very clear to us, redeem your time. Steward it well, so that you don't wind up just falling in with unwise things and unwise people and unwise patterns. Make the most of it. And so what does that look like? Again, his advice in the world, well, don't be drunk and don't be into debauchery, but do things that connect you to God, which in those days are spiritual things, and singing hymns and being connected to each other. Why? Giving thanks to God and also being connected to the love of God's people. And this is what we're hoping to do, is to talk about play as this redeeming of time, as this stewarding of time, as connecting us to others, to kind of take back our time from all of the tasks and the duties so that we can actually play and have joy. Because Paul's idea and ours is that if we steward our time well, then we are as God created us to be. Much like the children's message, God wills for us joy, and play is that way in which we most easily find that joy. There's a freedom in it, right? When we're playing and we're doing what we ought, there's a freedom in it for us. This freedom that God won for us through Christ on the cross. And clearly those who deprive themselves of it, or for whom that play is deprived, so then is the joy, so then is the freedom, so then is the connection to others, which is what happened to Charles Whitman. No one, Dr. Stuart Brown, no one has said that a lack of play is what caused Charles Whitman to do what he did. But we all recognize the corollary relationship between stewarding our time, growing ourselves, playing well, feeling the freedom and love of Christ in community, and how we live well. We are to redeem our time. Well, I dug deeply into that National Institute of Play website, and I learned all kinds of stuff over the last couple of weeks. And one I was very excited about, they talk about play personalities. Now, it reminds me of the theory of Gary Chapman in the 5 love languages. So I feel a need to review this. I talked about it last night, and I was surprised. How many of you know about the 5 love languages? Show of hands. All right, not enough of you. We did a worship series on this, but I'll give you a pass because it was probably 15 years ago. Time flies. But the 5 love languages, the theory of Gary Chapman in the 5 love languages are that each of us have a love language. We have a way in which we like to be loved and a way in which we like to express our loves. There's 5 of them, and each one of us has this way that we like to do that. Problem is, if you're married or have a partner or together with somebody, you probably are with someone who doesn't share that same language. And so what happens is we love how we want to be loved, and they don't receive that as well as we would like, because they want to be loved how they want to be loved. And so if you only love the way you want to be loved rather than understanding how they want to be loved and loving them well, you'll do worse. You have to understand how they want to be loved and love them that way, not how you want to love. And it's magical. You know, if you have one book to read this year, read that one, because it will help you. With that said, there are play personalities. Their research at the National Institute of Play, their research shows that we all have a way that we like to play. And if we can come to understand how we like to play, then we can better be who God created us to be and find more joy in that. So let's go over them really quickly. We'll race through them. Next slide. There you go. There's the collector. That's the person who likes the intricacies of a certain thing and just goes and just gets more and more of them because that's how they enjoy playing. Think Jay Leno in his car collection. There's the competitor. Now, last week we talked about how our society has grown to be far too competitive and we compete on everything. And again, the reason for that is and we've gotten too competitive. And the reason for that is there are 8 ways to play, and not everybody is a competitor, and our society kind of forces us to compete on some levels, right? But there are some people who are born to compete. I think of Michael Jordan, who not only played basketball, but with his friends, he wanted to beat you in cards, ping pong, pool. If he was awake, he was competing, right? Think of the creator or the artist. That's somebody who does stuff and creates things, but not necessarily just art, but creates things. The example that I stumbled across was Steve Jobs, who created all kinds of technology. One thing after another after another. Think of the director, the person who gets just as much joy lifting up someone else rather than doing it themselves. Oprah Winfrey, for example, she's been successful enough. Her joy in these days comes from lifting other people to success. Think of the explorer, somebody who always wants to get out there. What's next? Even if you're an avid reader, that could be you, right? I just want to always be learning, finding the next thing. I think of Richard Branson, who created a record company and then an airline company and now is exploring space. He's always out there exploring the next thing. Think of the Joker, the one who's always making everybody laugh, like Seinfeld. Or the kinesthete. That's a weird word, but it's the person who's always having to move. If you're into Pixar movies, think in The Incredibles Dash, right? Who's always moving. Or I think of, in my day, the best dancer, the greatest dancer was Gregory Hines, who was always creating through dance. Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, always moving. Think of the storyteller, the one who goes and yammers on and on and on. You know anybody like that? I think of Garrison Keillor, perhaps, right? If you know how God wires you and how you are supposed to play, it is there that you will find the way to be able to find the joy. You are most likely to become like the kid in the video in the children's message, just infused with this joy that cannot be stopped and cannot be contained. And that's what God wills for you. That's how God created you. Trying to make it easier. Think of a kid, maybe your kid, maybe your grandkid, maybe your sibling, and think of the thing that brought them the most joy. I think of my son, pictured here. When he was 3, 4, 5, we would hear in the next room him being in a room, and it didn't matter if it was army dudes or if it was cars or if it was planes, there was always some epic thing happening. We'd hear it 2 rooms away. That was what he did. And now what does he do? He's a personal trainer. And he brings people into a gym and they're epically struggling and things are crashing. Ah! So he's still the orchestrator of these epic struggles. Or I think of our daughter, who at 3, 4, 5 would like nothing more than a blank sheet of paper and paints or pens, markers, crayons. And she would create, and unlike some 3, 4, 5-year-olds where it looks like modern art, just a bunch of scribbles, no. She would tell you exactly what it is and what each part of it is. And now, in a part-time way, she's an artist, doing photography and clays, right? There is a freedom, a joy in being able to do what God created you to do. And my question for you is, what's your play personality? How do you like to play? How can you discover who you really are so that this joy that God has placed in your heart can be manifest? This freedom that you feel when you are exactly who God made you to be. How can you find that? That's what this summer is about. Playing. You see, God sent his son, Jesus Christ, into this world to die and rise so that you will be free. And that's not just in the next life. That's in this life too. How can you play? And how can you be free?